Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 6-5 podcast. I'm your host today, Daniel Newman, principal analyst, founding partner at Futurum Research, joined by my always esteemed, super handsome, Biff-like podcast co-conspirator, Mr. Patrick Moorhead. Patrick, good morning. What is with the Biff sweater? I've got to know, and by the way, the Biff reference, I'm hoping you're all as old as we are, so you know what I'm actually talking about.
Yeah, so essentially I'm going to be at the country club today doing Dell match play. So I thought I would play the part. Unfortunately, you can't see the whole repertoire. I have like ship pants on, a white tennies, and I'm ready to go to get my golf clap going. But no, really, thanks Dell for inviting me. I'm going to be there this afternoon and all day tomorrow with my son, Pico Moorhead.
That's pretty awesome. I may be swinging by there too. And yes, absolutely love it when we get these kinds of invitations. This week at the Dell Match Play, I got invited a couple weeks out to go to the Masters with Cloudera, which, by the way, that is the only way I'm ever getting into Augusta, just to be very clear. But excited to occasionally get these opportunities. Unfortunately, with the speed of tech, oftentimes the idea of actually getting half a day or a whole day. But, you know, hey, I heard a rumor you may even run into the big guy over there. So it might be absolutely worth it. And if you do see Michael, and I don't, please pass my hellos. We always appreciate them. By the way, our first opening speaker of our 6-5 Summit, which we will talk about more later. I do have to do the little disclaimer part of the show. That is just something we do. So remember, this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. And while we will be talking about publicly traded companies, sometimes even their earnings, please do not take anything said on this show as investment advice. Pat, we got a great show today, but you know what? I hate to be the bearer of good news. All our shows are great, aren't they?
You know, I like to think they are. At least in my head, they are, right? And that's half the battle, right? If you believe, sometimes it's true, but other times you believe it has nothing to do with reality. But listen, I'm really happy with the audience that we're picking up, the interaction, and people actually tune in for analysis. I mean, it's one thing to do consumer. It's next thing to do news, but to do mostly what we do is enterprise tech analysis, right? And which typically might get 50 views here or there. So I'm just thrilled. I never thought I'd be doing this, but it literally is. This is the best part of the day.
Yeah, it is a little bit of fun. And I won't lie, like when we were at Mobile World Congress, having a half a dozen people come up and be like, I love your pod. I mean, you know, these are those little validations because there's a lot of work here. And although it looks like we're having a lot of fun, and we are, it's also, you know, there's a lot of time, a lot of preparation, a lot of planning. We spend an immense amount of time in briefings and breaking down information, writing these pieces on Forbes, Market Watch, on our own media, doing the research, talking to the executives to hopefully synthesize this stuff so that all of you out there spend less time having to do the work. So like Pat said, light on news, big on analysis, and we have a show today. We're going to be talking about HPE, Big GreenLake Day. We're going to talk about Enterprise Connect, NVIDIA's GTC, huge event, Adobe's earnings, Luminar, one of our fan favorites, cool company in the automotive space. And then we're going to end on a interesting Microsoft study that went out just this past week. Patrick, I get the pilot seat today. You get the co-pilot seat, but you know, the fun part when you're the co-pilot is you get to do a little bit of the production work that nobody sees the magic behind the curtain. But the even better part is you kind of get to talk first a little more often on the topics themselves. So why don't we kick off? We started off a week ago. We were in Houston. We did some interesting pre-records. Those are all now live. And HPE had a slate, an immense number of announcements for GreenLake this week. Take us in.
Yeah, so little backstory here. As you may be aware, IT has moved. It's hard to say move to a service because most of it is not a service. But that's clearly the direction it's going. And whether it's software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, this is the way it's going. And historically, I would say 5 years ago, your only choice was to do a public cloud version of those as a service. Sure, there was managed services, but there was really no way to go in, with your credit card, order, make a click, and have something come as a service on-prem. And what was it, 3 years ago, Daniel, HPE CEO Antonio Neri got on stage and basically said, we are going to have every one of our products available as a service. I think he said by the end of 2022. And this GreenLake event was really a continuation of all of the action there. And what I am going to do is I'm going to flash this slide of the amount of services. First of all, hopefully you see that holistically, they're offering a lot of services that are GA. So everything that you see in the white is generally available. And the 12 new services that are on there are in orange was the focus of this event. And Daniel, you and I had the chance to sit down with some really interesting people. I mean, first off, Antonio Neri, we talked about storage and data. We talked about networking as a service, but holistically, and I would say thematically, HPE is first to market. They have the most amount of services that are available amongst the traditional vendors, okay? And Dell, HPE, Lenovo, Cisco, IBM, and I'll even put Oracle in there. So more services that are stood up than anybody else. But I'll caveat that with saying, but by the way, great job HPE, but this is very much a marathon and not a sprint. But I have to tell you, I feel right now, I didn't feel the momentum that HP had, let's say last year, but I would say in 2022, with the people that I talked to, the enterprises that I talked to, CIOs, they are bringing HPE GreenLake up as a viable option, even to some of the public cloud services. So pretty interesting stuff. I would like to see a little bit more of a drill down in the future of how HPE GreenLake customers can connect to the public cloud. And I think that's probably a Esmeralda conversation. But anyways, good job.
Yeah, it was a big event for HPE. Of course, it's always a big challenge to compete with Jensen and the magic leather jacket of GTC. So doing an event at the same time, I commend anyone. But we are in a world where tech is moving fast, and you cannot, as we know with our 6.5 Summit, try to meet everybody's timelines for events, and you got to get your launches out when you get them out. I've been a bull around what HPE has been doing for a long time. I think the market is finally starting to recognize the fact that the company is genuinely ahead. Now, again, it does not mean not NVIDIA, Lenovo, Cisco, Dell are not going to catch up. All these companies have a significant customer databases that are already spending on infrastructure. But right now, it's pretty safe to say in terms of on the kind of bring the cloud to you, the on-prem consumption-based service providers, that HPE has the most comprehensive portfolio available in the market today and is doing the most currently to deliver that cloud-like experience that Neri talked about all the way back in I believe it was 19. Is it 2018 or 19, Pat? The years, the days go slow, but the years go fast. But it has gone really quickly. This overall set of services, though, Pat, what I'd really like seeing is the move into data services at scale, network services at scale. I think everyone's going to have a compute and storage option. I think the data area is going to be the big opportunity. Some of the HPC offerings, the ability to accelerate through the GreenLake platform, of course, seems important to me. And something else, Pat, that HPE is on top of right now and a little bit in front of are co-location and partner services. Essentially, these companies, HPE, Cisco, Dell, they're all massively dependent on partner ecosystem, and having a more advanced offering to help their partners catch up in this consumption space, because these partners are desperate. They're looking for opportunities to compete as the public cloud continues to gain momentum. But as we always say when we talk about this, remember 75% or so of workloads are still on-prem. It's a very large opportunity. The TAM is growing. The demand for compute is growing. HPE is in a good position, triple-digit growth, big backlog of orders for this particular solution. But, the challenge, I'll say, their top-line growth is still slow. That transformation is taking time. And I'm looking for Neri and his team to continue to push the envelope there, because seeing the growth in GreenLake is the short term, but seeing overall growth getting back to 8, 10, 12% is what the market's going to want to see long term, Pat. So good slate of events. We got to get really close to it, got next to pretty much all the executives, Tom Black, Keith White, Assad, and got to hear their stories. It's an impressive set of updates, and off we go, Pat. We'll come back to this, I'm sure, in the next 6 months. All right, so I guess I have to now play the transition guy because that's my job today. So let's talk about Enterprise Connect a little bit. So, we had a number of clients that we advised, companies like Mitel, Poly, Zoom, Microsoft, Neat, a number of others that that we work with, or that we've had at our events. And there's a bevy of other clients, customers, technology companies. Enterprise Connect is kind of an interesting, Pat, it's sort of an interesting intersection of like old school AV integration, which, by the way, I did forever ago. I somewhat tend to leave that in my history, but unified communications AV and really modern big techs. You got companies like Microsoft and Cisco at scale, at EC, talking about the biggest, broadest distributions of the future of work. And then you've got these kind of niche technology companies that are making headsets and handsets and one-off whiteboard integration solutions there as well. So you're still kind of dealing with this remote work. What's the future of work look like? This sort of dichotomy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Microsoft Work Trends Index later. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. But what we have at a macro level is that we have this new world of work that kind of came out of the pandemic. We've got these companies that are all sort of vying, whether it's Poly, that talks a lot about room equity, whether it's Teams, Salesforce with Digital HQ, WebEx with kind of trying to be the center of a working environment of asynchronous communication. You've got the fact that appliances, Pat, are kind of coming in and out of vogue. You and I have got the bat phones, our Cisco WebEx, Pro devices that we love to use for meetings because they're just a little bit more engaging and a little bit more personal. You're seeing companies come into this space trying to kind of say, hey, we're outfitting rooms, we're outfitting huddle rooms. We're trying to implement and add AI technologies to enable more intelligence in the room, better noise cancellation. How do I work in a Starbucks while doing a meeting on my phone? And that's some of the solutions you've got coming out of these things. Some other things too, Pat, that are in focus, by the way, are digital events. One of the big awards, Zoom got a runner-up or a first place award from Best of Enterprise Connect for their new, I think it's their events platform. So you're seeing some of these companies, you got WebEx doing events, Microsoft's pushing towards events, Zoom is pushing into events. They're all looking at how do they offer this hybrid work experience, this hybrid event experience. I think you and I would agree we're massively less productive when we travel. And I think companies know that. So, there's a lot of things kind of happening concurrently. You have, one other area to mention too, it coming up big is the contact center. So Enterprise Connect has always been big for contact center. You got the 8x8s, the 5.9s, the Ring Centrals, all there. Of course, Zoom's launched a contact center solution. Cisco's been a legacy for the longest time in that space. Amazon made some announcements, by the way, at Enterprise Connect as well. So, as I said, you kind of look at from meetings to collaboration to rooms to in-person to contact center to customer experience. All of it was sort of covered in Enterprise Connect. And then, of course, you've got this legacy of AV providers all the way to this pure on software future run by IT companies. So it's kind of a bigger event than it necessarily gets credit for. But I think to some extent, we kind of have to evolve and zoom out a little bit from the micro of implementing a control system in a room to do a meeting to, hey, meetings are ubiquitous, part of our life. The data is where all the value is at. And you got companies like NVIDIA, which we'll talk about next, Pat, that are building collaboration software powered by AI that are going to actually be the core and intelligence that are going to allow us to have great meetings in the future.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal breakdown for not even being physically on the ground at the event. And there's only so many events that you and I can go to. I know I was worn out on the road for the previous 5 weeks, and I needed a break. So I caught everything that I could, and I really liked your breakdown, particularly of the different kind of vendors, which is all the way from folks that have millions of on-prem users like Mitel to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, cloud native, no on-prem companies like Zoom. And then, it's funny, AWS and Google reared their head, what am I trying to say here? Reared their heads as well.
Reared their beautiful heads. Sometimes people say rear their ugly heads, but that's not what we're saying here. So.
Definitely not. Definitely not. And you might ask, well, why is this such a hot space? Well, first of all, we're completely changing the way that we work. We're going from remote. Well, we're going from pre-COVID to 100% remote to getting to what I think is incredibly harder, which is hybrid. And if you can remember it, go into the office the first time you can go back and sit in one of the conference rooms and tell me how the experience is. Or be remote where somebody is in a conference room, multiple people in a conference room, and then tell me how good you think the experience is. And I would say that I'm expecting a complete overhaul of this market once people get in and realize that their experience sucks. The other reason is the amount of data and the amount of analytics that you can gain by looking at even the audio data. It is absolutely incredible. I know people are enamored with video, but the depth of knowledge you can get from applying artificial intelligence, let's say UCAS of 5.9, right? Laying in automation to be able to know when your customers are happy, to know when they're sad, to know when you should automatically move them to something, to automatically know what the person in the call center auto-magically shows up on their screen. That's super important. And, let's face it, call center experiences are probably one of the lowest customer sat scores on the planet, probably next to the post office. So there's a ton of room to go there. Good event. I really need to go next year.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I mean, we definitely put a few folks on the ground, and I expect that we'll have some coverage out of some of the takeaways. But I do think it's a zoom out macro moment right now, and I think we're going to hit that later when we talk work trends from Microsoft. So I'll say no more, Pat, and I'll just get back to my dutiful duties of hosting and say, let's talk about the mega event of the week, the one that literally felt like we were not only drinking from the fire hose, but we were being sprayed across the face with so many announcements at one time. I was literally doing the keynote. I'm like taking a note of the new thing. I'm like, wait, he's already onto the third next thing. How is he going this fast with this many announcements? The magic leather jacket, what the heck, Pat, caught your attention at GTC?
Well, first off, it was definitely the fire hose. I agree. And it took me about 3 days to even get through it. I've published absolutely nothing except for Twitter. So that's how behind I am. But I am going to publish something eventually. I had my whole team engaged. They're going to be writing. They're going to be writing about this. But I think what I want to do is give my bigger takeaways from an opportunity we had to talk with NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang. And so, this might get a little geeky, but it's a geeky business. So, it's kind of funny. I chuckle when people ask NVIDIA, well, why did you do a monolithic die? And a monolithic die is essentially the way that all chips were done until the last 2 years. Now you see big, huge designs that are using chiplets that use really high-speed interconnects and advanced packages to make them happen. And it's kind of funny. Like I hear NVIDIA get that question, and it's absolutely ridiculous, because if you can hit PPW, performance, power, wattage, and you can hit your yield targets, you absolutely want a frickin' monolithic die because it's cheaper. And the way that Jensen talked, I'm absolutely convinced we will see a multi-die H100. This is their new GPU. So imagine 4 H100s in an advanced package. Would have to figure out the power, but I think NVIDIA can figure out just about anything. So the other thing that came across is, even though there's the Grace super processor out there, that's a CPU, by the way, that is based on the latest ARM Neoverse IP, don't confuse them with trying to go toe-to-toe with AMD or Intel or Ventana, somebody like that in the data center. I think we're going to see NVIDIA do CPUs that are fit for a purpose, that aren't necessarily, they're not getting from an AMD or an Intel or a Ventana. And what that means is, I mean, look at Grace. I mean, the bandwidth of Grace is higher than any CPU I'm aware of. And that's essentially to get data between in and out the CPU to the GPU. So I think the market wants an alternative to Intel and AMD out there for general purpose data center CPUs. Also on the PC side, I think we need, markets always go in three, and maybe Qualcomm's that third PC vendor that's out there. But I think NVIDIA would just bring the hammer down on an ARM-based Windows SoC. My final observation, or maybe it's a reiteration, which was, oh my gosh, NVIDIA just didn't bring out a chip or a technology. It brought out new IP in the GPU and the CPU and interconnects. It brought the processor out, which is a combination of those. And then it brought out entire platforms. And then it brought entire systems, i.e. DGX. And then it brought out entire supercomputers, which are multiple DGXs networked together in an intelligent fashion. And then they put APIs and services and programming on top of it. This company is a full stack play headed towards what I think Apple is doing right now, where they could be a one-stop shop for the data center for just about anything. They are missing the CPU, of course, but it's kind of funny. Strategically, I was thinking about this, Daniel. If you're NVIDIA, you much rather have AMD and NVIDIA investing all their R&D into the CPU, banging up against each other, going general purpose, and spending all their R&D so they won't have as much R&D to compete with NVIDIA on the GPU side. So that kind of hit me yesterday as I was going through this, but that's my analysis. Don't yawn. This is interesting content.
Oh, people know I'm not yawning because I'm bored. I'm yawning because I work too much. But I'm super actually stoked about all the announcements, Pat. You hit a few things that just worth reiterating. I mean, the full stack narrative, hardware, software, frameworks, architectures. This is what defines and differentiates NVIDIA. You talk to some of their key employees and execs, they don't even really necessarily want to be a chip company or known as a chip company. They will say, we're a software company, we're a full stack. And the truth is they are, and that is why the company has become such a juggernaut, is that they don't only control, the ecosystem from the standpoint of the supply of GPU chips, but they have the software and they draw the developers and the ecosystem in. Do it across the board. You mentioned it, Pat. It's hardware, it's fabric. Our team, Ron Westfall, just wrote about, a little bit about the DPU, and there's a new fabric from a company called Pluribus that was really interesting that they're partnering with NVIDIA and just the way that they're using DPUs to strategically offload workloads. And by the way, creating a category that they didn't even really own by just creating the vernacular of the category.
Yeah.
And so that actually makes me want to run into another category they're sort of creating. In our conversation with Jensen, you and I both had the chance to talk to him. I asked him about Metaverse and Omniverse, because there was a slate of Omniverse announcements at this thing. Omniverse for 3D, Omniverse for industrial digital twins. They have the OVX now, a specialized compute platform literally for creating industrial digital twins. You think about accelerated computing for different things, drug compound identification. Well, now they've got one for literally creating simultaneous, autonomous, coexisting worlds where we're going to be able to test automobiles, smart cities and grids. We're going to be able to build products and services, and they're going to use AI to continue to evolve intelligently in real time on the OVX platform. And then you've got Omniverse. Now I have 150,000 downloads of Omniverse, okay, with a 50 million download opportunity. Pat, you want to talk about recurring revenue? So chip companies don't usually have recurring revenue, do they? Not at scale. NVIDIA does. So NVIDIA has a plan already in place across its business. In Omniverse, it's going to look at the 50 or so million developers that Huang mentioned and charge them $1,000 a year for the access to the Omniverse platform, which, by the way, they've now put in the cloud to democratize and make it more available. So this could be Omniverse to develop apps for metaverse gaming. It could be Omniverse to develop apps for industrial digital twins. It could be Omniverse for 3D, for 3D rendering, for creating virtual worlds. And they've already, by the way, got all these softwares out there, Pat. $1,000 times 50 million potential users that could then use this to deploy things on Roblox, deploy things on Meta, deploy things in Microsoft Mesh, deploy things anywhere they want to. Pat, do the math quick. 50 million times 1,000.
It's a lot of freaking money.
50 billion, I believe, is what it is recurring. Oh, by the way, that's just the developers. Then they charge $1,000 a year for each device. That could be that could be each robot created, an avatar created. That could be an autonomous vehicle. So now you've got $1,000 a year times, was that another 50 million, 100 million? How many of these robots and autonomous vehicles might be out there? Oh, and then Pat, by the way, the same thing being done with their enterprise AI license. So there's an enterprise AI license to be able to basically layer on the NVIDIA frameworks and software on top of whatever core you're already using. So they're like, yeah, we hope you'll use our GPUs, but there's another 50 million compute cores out there, servers, to your point, Pat. We'll charge $2,000 a year to add that's another 100 billion. So I don't know if you saw this, Pat, but I'll kind of end here. They basically came out with a new TAM looking across about 150 million in Omniverse, the automotive TAM, the gaming TAM, and the data center TAM. And guess how big the new TAM that NVIDIA announced is?
200 billion.
Like $1 trillion. I'm not kidding. The overall NVIDIA TAM that they put out there's a whole market watch piece of how they basically aggregated all the TAMs of their different business units, including the 150 billion Omniverse. Because again, just the 50 million developers and robots, the recurring revenue of that would be over $100 billion. And so when I wrote back in 2020 that NVIDIA had the trajectory to be the next $1 trillion market cap company, they continue to put the pieces in place to do that. A very good event for the company. I really do. I do feel a little bit of sympathy for the companies trying to keep up right now. I'm not sure how they can do it, but at the same time, I never put it past anybody. But good event for NVIDIA, Pat. All right, let's keep rolling onto something that we can do a little quicker, which was, we are starting once again to get through that earnings cycle. And this week we had Adobe. It was an interesting earnings. I'll kind of take this one. Company, reported record revenue, records across their different segments. Their experience business. So they got the Creative Cloud, the Document Cloud, and the Experience Cloud. The revenue was up about 10%. I saw somewhere and they said it surged. I'm not sure when you're a cloud company, 9% growth is surging, but it was a strong number, strong growth. And remember, we're kind of in this first wave of earnings since the market sort of corrected itself. So now we're kind of starting to look at numbers and growth against a more realistic economy, because for a long time we just had this fire economy. We've seen markets pull back. Now, one of the interesting things is kind of where is the growth coming from? Well, like I said, you're getting about, oh, by the way, with inflation, Pat, you know what, 9%, it's something like an adjusted 17% is what it actually equates to. I'm not exactly sure, but that's how they documented it in their breakdown. Some of the faster growth came in areas like Experience Cloud that saw in the 20s of percentage. Digital Experience, I think it was like 22% adjusted. And then also Document Cloud saw its recurring revenue go up about 26%. So some pretty strong numbers there. But one of the things that was really interesting was this is one of the first companies that reported, Pat, with Russia in play. So if you recall, Adobe basically is pulling out all business of Russia, and it wrote off $75 million in recurring revenue. Now, that was kind of interesting too, because 75 million doesn't sound like that big of a number. So all of Russia accounted for about 75 million, and there was another 12 million in ARR coming out of Ukraine. Company wrote down all of it out of their future guidance. But to their credit, to how they see the market and how their business performing this year, did not change their overall guidance. So even though they took close to 100 million in recurring revenue out of the business in its expectation and their forecast for the rest of the year, the company actually left their guidance intact. Here's the long and short of it, Pat. I think it's in line. I think, their growth overall a little bit lower than like a Salesforce, but I think that's kind of where the company is in its maturity cycle. I think the CDP business is hot. I do think the metaverse is a big opportunity. The company, in terms of creators, when you're thinking about like creating augmented reality experiences on the internet where you're designing your shoe with Nike, that's Adobe. Adobe's the one creating that kind of experience. I think as we take that to the next level, you got the AR, VR, XR editions, you've got these metaverse worlds, and you're minting brand items, when you get your Louboutins or your, what are those fancy shoes you wear? Balenciaga? I don't know. When you're doing that.
I can't afford those. Those were my kids.
And I'm sure they can. But when we enter these next virtual worlds and you see these brand metaverse created experiences, you can be pretty certain Adobe is going to be playing a big part in that. So I see the metaverse and I see the CDPs as the big opportunities there, Pat. The Russia data was really interesting to me. And like I said, the growth was okay. It was solid, but it's really hard to ever kick a company when they're delivering record revenue. So it was a pretty good quarter for Adobe.
Yeah, so I think it's important to put Adobe in perspective. They're a legacy company who wants to break out, and that was similar to Microsoft, I would say 7 years ago. They haven't had their Microsoft moment yet to get to, let's say, a revenue of, overall revenue of 25%. Their SaaS businesses seem very in line with, 20-something, maybe 30-something would be nicer. But it's a classic blend of new businesses and old businesses. Like a trooper, I give my Adobe PDF license. I pay it every month, right? And I think that there's a lot of those folks who are doing that. Their overall numbers are kind of uninspiring, but like I said, very close to what you have with a blended piece, and they just needed to get more of the new business. I'm actually surprised. What did you call the future modern work or something at 25%? Something like that. Yeah. Experience really seems like it should be super high growth on a percentage basis because the revenue is probably low. Anyways, very, very interesting company. I know them mostly for the PDF and also for their video and photography tools.
And just as a note, because we haven't done Adobe as many times, just a quick boomerang here is they sort of have their overall growth numbers in a different category in experience and media, and then they couple that with what they kind of have their subscription revenues. And so the subscription revenues are growing a little faster, kind of on the same pace as that Salesforce, 15 to 20% in their core businesses. But at the same time, I think everybody's kind of like, is that enough? Is that enough when you're in these key categories?
Yeah.
But the difference between some of those lower growth companies that you and I kind of just try to figure out how people will get excited about, remember, it is recurring revenue. So recurring revenue is hot, and it's always going to be hot. And of course, it's great to grow at 100%, but 10% compound means you're going to double every 5 years. So that's not so bad when you're in the billions of dollars of revenue.
Yeah, so, it's kind of like the HPE GreenLake ARR number.
Exactly, it's exactly right. And so or even when we talk about AWS and Azure, we always talk about how they're growing 40s and 50s. And what I'm saying is you got to remember the compounding aspect of that is pretty darn impressive. That's why AWS is doing 16 billion a quarter now. So you can see how fast that can snowball.
Yeah, that's why I think it's fair to compare them to a pure, a SaaS play or a combined SaaS play. And, let's face it, the Azure number is lifted a lot by PaaS. And also the fact that they put their own workloads on Azure, right? Like Office. So
it doesn't hurt.
No, it doesn't
hurt. Yeah. So, Pat, we got a couple more topics. We're running a little long, so I'll try to run through these. But you got a big acquisition piece from our very interesting folks at Luminar.
Yeah. So if you don't know who Luminar is, essentially they're the leading provider of LiDAR for the company. And LiDAR got famous when Elon Musk called it I think it was a fool's errand. Now, at that point, I think, LiDAR was $10,000 and was this huge, cop siren looking thing. And now the BOM cost is down to $1,000. Luminar has a vision or a goal to get that BOM cost down to $100, right? That includes the laser, silicon, other odds and ends. And Luminar bought a company called Freedom Photonics, which Freedom Photonics doesn't even have a Twitter page, or I couldn't find it. But a very successful company that's doing cost reduced, miniaturized IP for lasers. And this is essentially to enable Luminar to get to that $100 BOM cost. Let me just flash up what these things look like. Right, you can see that is a laser that is on there. Obviously, it doesn't have the optics on it, but this is the semiconductor required to do it. Here are all of the different parts that Freedom Photonics does, and you can see, multiple size laser, photodetectors, and they even do custom products out there. Here's the technology that they do, and you can see, the large part of a laser is essentially the portion that either takes in light or moves light. And they have a ton of private label photonics that I don't know exactly which products they're in, but at some point I'd like to find out. But this is, again, all about the $100 BOM cost for receiver, ASIC, and the laser.
Yeah, it's a big moment, Pat. I mean, there's definitely the technical underpinnings that you mentioned. It also comes down to Luminar has a very unique set of technology. It's proven out to have strong interest, wins with companies like Volvo, Mercedes-Benz. There's a general desire in the market. You and I have been witness demo. We've shared this more than a few times, that what LiDAR can add from a security and safety standpoint for drivers really should be non-negotiable, but it just is a reflection of our society, capitalism at all costs, right? Like, run the kid over, it's okay. But in all seriousness, they've been a partner to Mobileye, which is by units probably one of the most highly sold technologies on the planet as it comes to the L2 Plus, and of course Mobileye is moving very quickly as well. The company Luminar needs to be attractive to more OEMs, bringing in-house innovation, technology, intellectual property that enables them to get that BOM down and get this technology into as many vehicles as possible in the shortest horizon. Everybody that knows the automotive space knows this is not an overnight phenomenon. You don't just come out with cool technology and they start implementing it into cars that people are buying today. You need to get this technology in front of these OEMs today in order to get this implemented into technology 3, 4, 5 years into the future. So, and it's also, when it comes to chip companies, getting more and more competitive. NVIDIA, of course, we didn't really even talk about, what they were announcing. and with Hyperion, but you got NVIDIA, Qualcomm, Intel, all massively invested, understanding that 20% of the BOM of a vehicle by 2030 is going to be semiconductors. So Luminar's got a lot of growth, a lot of future, a lot of potential. It's still early days, a smart acquisition. Check out the research note I wrote in the show notes if you want to know more. Pat, we got to keep moving. Let's talk about the work trends index that came out. I wrote a piece on Forbes about it. Basically came out this week. Microsoft did it. It was the second time, Pat. And in the focus of this report really is all about looking at what is work going to look like after this pandemic. So we saw, this massive shift. Everything's going to be hybrid. Everything's going to be remote. We're never going back to the office. In fact, guess what I've seen this week? Endless photos of managers showing pictures of teams in boardrooms getting physically back together.
I know.
It's so great that we're back together.
I know.
And it's like, all right. So what we know now is that we all wanted to be remote until we were remote. Now that we're remote, we all want to be back in person. So truth be told, it's a continuum, and you're going to find a balance. And some companies are going to be heavily remote. Some companies are going to be heavily in person, and it's not going to be right or wrong. It's going to be what fits the culture, what fits productivity. But this study basically looked at 31,000 people in 31 countries and kind of shows what we're learning as we go in terms of work. Some of the most interesting parts to me was data point about quote unquote of what's worth it to people. One of the things that the pandemic has caused is a focus on work-life balance. We've all heard about the Great Resignation with almost full unemployment in this country right now, and the amount of choice in our industry, Pat. I mean, if you want a job and you're any good, you would have to be literally sitting at home, eating Cheetos in your underwear to not get hired. And you might still get hired. That's how much demand there are. But, people in the report are basically coming out and saying they're more likely to put their personal life ahead, health and wellness ahead of work. 53% are more likely now than they were before the pandemic. 47% are more likely to put family and their personal lives first. Again, that's more than before the pandemic. So people are more focused on family, more focused on work life. And of course, and unsurprisingly, Pat, the charge is led by millennials and Gen Z that plan to leave their jobs in the next year. 43% are saying they're somewhat or extremely likely to change jobs in the coming year. Surprise, as an old millennial that hasn't changed jobs in a while, I feel for y'all. I cannot believe that they didn't give you the 26 weeks off when you started the job this year.
I know.
But in all seriousness, these were the kind of statistics. By the way, unsurprisingly, older workers, Gen Xers, and wait, are you a boomer or are you the forgotten generation?
Man, I'm the forgotten generation. Born in 1968, baby.
I'm totally kidding.
Heat of the Vietnam War.
So, some of the other things that were really interesting is that, people are still feel that their managers are largely out of touch. Over 50% are saying that. And by the way, 50% of leaders actually want to return to the office full time. They want to be able to take those selfies in a room with their entire team sitting there so they can watch everybody work. And then, of course, the question mark is how much does technology fill the gap? We're seeing messages increase by a ton, 30+%. But in February of 2020, Pat, messages increased by 252%. So we're seeing huge increases. But what probably isn't happening now is we're doing more meetings and we're doing less thinking time, strategy time, and of course, less culture building time. So just a couple of personal assessments on this whole thing, Pat. One is it's going to come down to a balance. Two, every company is going to have to think about what works best for them. Three, technology cannot replace all. We are way more productive. And so you have to rethink about the way we schedule work for people if they are remote and hybrid, because people can get what used to be a 40 or 50 hour week done in like 20 for sure if they're productive at home. At the same time, we've got to put health and wellness as priorities. We need to use technology not just to have more meetings, but to actually help people monitor that they're utilizing their resources effectively, that they're taking care of themselves. I think this technology is coming, things like Microsoft Viva, things that your Apple Watch or Oura Ring might tell you. We need to be sleeping well. We need to be able to get time for introspection and thinking. And we do need time with our teams in person, Pat. It's just like bestie lunches that, we go out for. Getting our team together when we did at Mobile World brought a large part of our team in person. And there is experience and team building that you just simply cannot do remotely. I don't care how good the collaboration is. But some really interesting stuff in this report. Check out the link, Pat. I'm sure you, with a quickly growing organization as well, have had some thoughts about this.
Yeah, so my company is going on its 11th year, and we've been remote all the time. So I've seen front and center how hard it has been to run an organization and manage an organization remotely for 11 years. Now I run a light handed operation. The average analyst is 50 years old in my organization, and I hire very mature workers. So we're either Gen X or boomers. You sucked a lot of the oxygen out of this report, which was phenomenal. But I want to make two comments. The reason that managers want to go back to work is because they're having a hard time managing their employees remotely. Okay, and first of all, I think that is that's human nature, right? It is harder to do that. And on the other side, you have people who want to live in lower cost areas. And they want to live remotely, right? And maybe that's the younger generation. I don't know. I have to tell you, I have a 22-year-old who absolutely wants to be in the office, right? She's single. She wants to meet people. And the whole remote thing, she's not in for it. So that, I think, and you didn't do this, by the way, but saying Gen Z wants this and Gen X wants this, a lot of it comes down to kind of lifestyle. Right, where my 24-year-old daughter who's married, who is also a Gen Z, she's fine with doing remote. She's not going to work to meet a bunch of friends, right? Or find a significant other. She already has one. Anyway, so a lot of it has to do with the place in life, and then my final piece is getting back to what I said a year ago, which was this hybrid thing is going to be harder than doing all remote, right? And we have to have better technology that enables the way that everybody wants to work. That's just the reality. So I think, Daniel, it'll probably take 3 to 5 years to fully respond to this COVID moment and get situated here, which, if I put my capitalistic hat on, I think is going to be a huge opportunity for the tech providers in this space.
Well, you hit it, Pat, and I'm sorry about all this oxygen sucking that I've been doing here.
But it was good analysis, and people should check out your Forbes article. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. We will put that in the show notes, as we always do. So, and there you have it. That is the 6-5. Actually, twice in a week, Pat. We started and finished the week because we did the late episode, and that was my fault. So now put your Biff sweater back on. Let's get you off to the golf course. I hope I will be able to get out there and see you there, if not ever so briefly. Unfortunately, everything that's going on is keeping me pinned a little bit more at my desk than I'd hoped to be. My boss, by the way, absolutely horrible. That's all I'm going to say. He just drives me to the end of my existence. But it is Friday. There's something to be happy about there, and it is 5 o'clock somewhere. It's across the ocean, but that isn't so bad. All right, so good stuff to me, bad stuff to Pat. Hit that subscribe button. Join us. And Pat, we'll talk about this maybe more next week because we went long, but we do have a summit coming up June 7 to 9. And we do have some really big announcements. Should we even tease it this week, or do we want to leave it off one more week?
Let's leave it off one. Let's leave it off one more week.
All right, we'll leave it off one more week. But let's just say we've got some execs, some CEOs, some top leaders, and some fascinating conversations that are going to be coming out June 7 to 9. On demand, virtual. Sign up is available, the65summit.com. But for now, again, got to say goodbye. We appreciate you. Signing off. See you later.